Hello, welcome to the Old Glory Games podcast, and my name is Kyle, and my co-host is Greg, and we'll get to him in a second. This particular podcast is different because it's longer than normal, and we're going to break it up into two parts. So just so you know, we actually make these podcasts roughly 1 month in advance. So in other words, this podcast was recorded on April 23rd, 2024. The time that this podcast airs is going to be May 20th, 2024. And so we're going to cut this halfway through, but I might say we may actually have a break in between parts 1 and 2 to cover some more pertinent stuff like what happened with the Tyson Fury and Usyk fight. And we also may talk about the upcoming Mike Tyson fight as well, but we shall see. But for now, here is part 1 of the Old Glory Games podcast, episode 12, and the topic is Bubba Wallace. And if you don't know what that's about, check it out. Also, check out some other videos in the Conservative Take YouTube channel. I'll leave a link below of that whole debacle that he's been going on for the past several, years. So anyway, with that being said, here is Kyle, myself, and Greg with episode 12. Enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Old Glory Games podcast. This is episode 12. Moving right along. I am Kyle. I'm here with my buddy, my pal, my co-host, my partner in crime, Mr. Greg. And this is a special episode because it's near and dear to Greg's heart. And Greg, I'm going to let you share with the audience, with if I already know, because it's on the thumbnail and it's on the title, of what we're going to be talking about.
Sure. So we'll be discussing Bubba Wallace. And if you're not aware of who Bubba Wallace is, he is a current NASCAR Cup driver. He, I guess, rose to the level of infamy, I guess, when I think it was back in 2020, while at Talladega, someone from his team declared that they saw a noose in his garage. And that sparked a lot of outrage, a lot of debate, a lot of tension at that point, because I dare say, and I love NASCAR. I'm a NASCAR fan. So this is close to where I live as far as sports and how I feel about this particular situation. So let me back up a little bit more before I get into that. Anybody that knows me knows I'm a huge Richard Petty fan. So basically anybody that drives the 43, that's my guy. So Bubba was the beneficiary of the NASCAR Drive for Diversity, I think it was called, program to try to encourage minorities, I think females, I think anybody that's not normally represented in the sport, to encourage them to get involved and to hopefully, make it to NASCAR's top level. So he was a beneficiary of that program. Also, Kyle Larson, who we'll talk about in a little while, Daniel Suarez, he was also a beneficiary of that program as well. So the program certainly has done some good as far as identifying top talent that happens to be, minority talent, and hopefully encouraging other minorities to get involved in the sport. So Richard Petty Motorsports gave Bubba Wallace his first chance to drive at the Cup level, I think back in 2017, when then driver of the 43 car, Eric Almirola, was injured. I think Almirola was injured in a race at Kansas, if I'm not mistaken, and he was rear-ended pretty violently to the point where it lifted the car off the ground. And I think he broke some vertebrae in his back, and he was out for several races. So Richard Petty Motorsports reached out to Bubba and had Bubba fill in for Almirola while he was out. And that was a prime opportunity for Bubba because the following year, Richard Petty Motorsports offered him the seat full time in the 43. So I'll back up even further. If you're not at all aware of who Bubba Wallace is, he's an African-American race car driver, and that fact is a major basis for our conversation about him at this point in time. So going back to, how he worked his way up to a Cup car seat. So he gets that opportunity, drives for Richard Petty Motorsports. Richard Petty Motorsports, they were a mid-level team. They were sponsorship poor. They didn't have the resources the top teams did. So it was a challenge for them to compete week in and week out. So they give, Bubba the opportunity, and he didn't do great. He did okay considering the equipment he was in. And I will say at that point, NASCAR fans like Bubba. I mean, it's a feel-good story. He comes up through the ranks. He's a black driver, and, there are not a lot of those in NASCAR. But just to get a shot at driving at NASCAR's top level, he won some truck races prior to that. So he had some success at some of the lower levels of NASCAR. So he gets his opportunity, and I will attest to the fact that fans cheered him because, I've been to races, and when he walks out for driver introduction, he got a decent amount of cheers. There certainly weren't any boos at that particular point in time. He was fairly well liked. So fast forwarding to the incident that I mentioned a little while ago about the alleged noose that was found in his garage at Talladega. And I recall when this happened, and I'm thinking, come on, that can't be right. So I think it was 15 FBI agents, 15 were sent down to investigate this alleged, I don't know what you want to call it, hate crime or just whatever you want to call it. This symbol of hate, I guess, for lack of a better term. So they come down, they investigate, and they determine that this was not a symbol of hate or hate crime or anything else like that, because guess what? That same so-called noose, which, by the way, is a garage door pull down. It's not a noose. And the exact same rope was there the year before, and which basically showed that there was no intent there, because how are you going to know the following year a black driver is going to be in that garage? You're not going to know that. So a big deal was made out of it. Oh gosh, that's just so racist and hateful, and what a shame, and shame on you, NASCAR. And unfortunately, NASCAR has an unfair reputation for being a sport that a bunch of hillbilly beer drinking rednecks, waving their Confederate flags, and they're a bunch of racists and all of that. That's not true. I've been to multiple races, and some of the nicest, engaging, friendly people you'll ever find at a sporting event, you'll find at NASCAR races. And again, as I previously mentioned, up until this point, Bubba was cheered. He was cheered by the fans. So going back to this incident, when the truth came out, and as I learned more about what really went on, I'm like, come on, this is not a noose. Do you people not know what a noose is? Okay. So
right.
Seriously, you've seen movies, you've seen when nooses this is not a noose. Come on. So allegedly somebody from his team found it and informed somebody that there's a noose in one of the garages. Now, I would say that if it was one of the folks from his team, they should know better. It's like you've been in garages before. You know that this is not a noose, but somebody blew the whistle. Hey, this is a noose. And I told you about the FBI involvement and all of that and the hoopla over it. And they determined that this was not directed at Bubba. This is not some sort of act of hate or insensitivity or anything else like that. It's just a garage door pull down. That's all it is. So a big deal was made out of it. And oh gosh, I just feel so bad for Bubba. And, you know, in this day and age, he shouldn't have to deal with that. And on and on and on. And see, now your mainstream fans who had never heard of Bubba Wallace had no idea who he was. They knew who he was now. And all of the entertainers that had no clue, that don't follow NASCAR, had no idea there was a black driver in NASCAR, they were making their feelings felt. Oh, this is shameful. And, you know, this, that, and the other thing. And, oh, you know, NASCAR is a bunch of racists and this, that, and the other thing. So not long after that, I think it was maybe the morning of the race, in a show of solidarity, and I don't know whose idea it was, but allegedly it was Jimmy Johnson and I think, I don't know, Kevin Harvick or Matt Kenseth, one of the couple of the top guys in the sport at the time, decided it would be a good idea to push Bubba's car to the front on pit road as a show of unity and solidarity. I'm thinking, seriously? So you're pushing his car in front of everybody else's, not because he won the pole or not because he won the last race or not anything he did on the track. You're pushing his car to the front of everybody else because he's an alleged victim of racism, which had been since proved to be a hoax. Now, I don't know at that point if it had been proved to be a hoax by the time the FBI got done with their investigation, but you are assuming, even, you know, a rush to judgment or whatever you want to call it, if the verdict wasn't already in, you're just assuming that's what it was. So you're doing all of these things over, you know, an imaginary affront to Bubba Wallace. So once that happened, I think the fans' opinion of him changed on a dime, because now, even before this happened, I don't think you heard Bubba talk too much about race or anything else like that. But now all of a sudden, that's what this is about. It's all about race. It's all about people not wanting him to succeed in NASCAR. It's about people that are against him because he's a black driver. I'm like, nobody cares that he's a black driver. The only people that care about him being a black driver is maybe the media and, you know, some other people. But NASCAR fans, by and large, don't care if he's a black driver. They just care, can he drive or not? That's really all that matters. Can you drive or not? So since I think at that moment, and I'm not going to question his integrity or his motivations or anything else like that. I'm commenting on what I saw and how I felt at that particular point in time. So this happened in 2020. This was, I think, a contract year for Bubba. And
that's right.
Yeah, and he had won 0 races in the series. And I realized that he got an opportunity under the diversity program to drive a cup car. But at the end of the day, it's about results, or at least it should be. So, you know, and potentially he would be looking for a job at the end of the season. So, okay, this happens. Now you're getting all kinds of mainstream attention. The Joe Blow walking down the street who didn't know who you were yesterday, they sure know who you are today. So now he is all of a sudden some sort of social justice advocate. And, you know, he gets into Black Lives Matter, and I'm not going to get into them any further than that, regardless of what your feelings are on them. But I think it's documented as far as what they wound up being. So even at that time,
I'll say it.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I know you will. So at that point, they were still a very polarizing group. And that's a nice way of putting it. So he hitched his wagon to them. And actually, one of the following races after that, BLM was the sponsor of the 43 car. And I'm like, seriously? Oh, yeah.
I think I have a picture of that right here. Well, I have a picture of his shirt.
BLM was on the car. And I just read again about the story before we went on air, and the reason given then was, well, Richard Petty Motorsports couldn't find a sponsor for this race, so they put BLM on the car. And I'm thinking, I don't know if I believe that. Now, I know Richard Petty Motorsports, they were strapped for sponsorship. I get it. But you couldn't come up with somebody other than BLM to put on the car just to fuel the fire of this whole thing. So you've got all this going on, and you've basically got Bubba going around, and I don't know if he implicitly or explicitly suggested that NASCAR fans are a bunch of racists, but he did say that he believed the Confederate flag should not be flown at races because it represented hate, not heritage. Whatever your opinion is on that, that's your opinion. I'm just telling you what he said. And then 2 days later, NASCAR banned Confederate flags. And I'm not going to get into that. You know, if you think that's justified, fine. If you don't, fine. I'm not getting into it. What I am saying is he did not endear himself to NASCAR's fan base, right or wrong, because now he's turning this incident into something racial, even after it was proven it wasn't.
Okay. That's my problem.
So we go back to his probably needing to look for a job at the end of the season. One of the things that will make you attractive to another prospective team is if you bring sponsors with you. You will have a much better chance of getting another top tier ride if you have sponsors. And after this Noose Gate thing happened, all of a sudden, here comes McDonald's, here comes Columbia Outdoor Sportswear, and some other sponsors that weren't there before. Now they're getting on the bandwagon because, hey, everybody's talking about Bubba. We're going to get behind Bubba. We're going to sponsor Bubba. Let's end hate and all these other things. They got in there. So now, once Bubba got mainstream attention, now he's getting sponsors. Okay. So at the races after that, he was being mercilessly booed. I mean, flat out, just straight out, throatily, heartily, vocally booed. Now, the drivers at the time that were probably most disliked by NASCAR fans, the public enemy number one, Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch, everywhere that man goes, he's booed. But guess what? He wins races. He does. He's a jerk, but he backs up all that talk with results on the track. So Bubba, with all of this going on, he went from being a well-liked, feel-good story. He just turned flat out arrogant. I mean, very unlikable. I mean, he's been caught on camera flipping somebody the bird. He uses profanity. And I know those guys, curse on the radio. I get it. But if you're on TV and you're being interviewed by the network, I mean, watch your language. Come on, kids. He didn't care. He He just lets whatever fly out of his mouth. And now he's super arrogant. Like, I'm the cock of the walk around here. I can say whatever I want. And I don't care what people think about what I say. And he suggested that basically fans were treating him they were holding him to a double standard. And if other guys did what he did, nothing would be said, and on and on and on. Basically playing the victim, which I can't stand that. All of the opportunities he's gotten to that point, and you're playing the victim. How are you a victim? What are you a victim of? So people expecting you to act like you've got some sense and to be respectable to other people? What's wrong with that? So, his personality is changing. He's turning into basically a jerk, and he's being booed. Now, I think mainstream media and some other pundits or personalities that know nothing about NASCAR suggested, they're just booing him because he's black. Wrong. I was at the races before this happened. He was cheered. They started booing him because, quite frankly, he insulted the NASCAR fans, made them mad, turned this into a race thing. Now, as a fan, if somebody, some athlete or whatever said that I was a racist, I'd take offense to that.
Yeah.
And I would show my displeasure by booing that person lustily. And that's what happened with Bubba. Had nothing to do with him being black. Had everything to do with him being a jerk and turning this into some kind of race thing when it absolutely wasn't. It was proven not to be racially motivated, but he hung on to that. And he basically said after that, he doesn't care what anybody says. It was a news, and that's all there is to it. I'm like, okay, dude. But, I think the thing about him, and just to think about what happened after that, he left Richard Petty Motorsports at the end of that season. I was glad to see him go. I was relieved.
Yeah.
They don't need all the drama, all the headache from somebody that had won to that point 0 races. And yes, it reminds a lot of people of the Jussie Smollett thing. And he took offense to that. People that said it was a hoax and it wasn't. Sounds like a hoax to me. Making out like this was a racial thing, and it wasn't. That so-called news, which it wasn't, it was there before you got there. It was there a year before you got there. So how is this racial? They're making it out to be. He goes on and takes those major sponsors I just told you about with him. McDonald's, Columbia, and maybe the Air Force. Now, the Air Force stayed and sponsored RPM, and they're still a sponsor of the 43 car, I think, to this day. Not many races, but a handful. But he took those sponsors with him to a new team that Michael Jordan started along with Denny Hamlin, 2311 Motorsports, I think it's called. So he takes his sponsors, and also his team has more resources, and which would give him more chances to be successful and win races. So now, at this point, he's even more arrogant, if that's than what he was before. So now he's a big. So, when you see the previews for the races each week, they have a graphic. Fox has a graphic, and maybe one of the other networks that shows the races, but I know Fox does. And they have a graphic with the pictures of different drivers. And if you look at the graphic for the upcoming race and you look at it, it's like, okay, there's a past champion, there's a past champion, there's another past champion, there's another past champion, and there's Bubba. And I'm like, okay, what is wrong with this picture? At that point, I don't know if when we first started seeing that, I'm trying to think if he had won any races at that point or not. But even if he did, he only won 2, and he's not sniffed the championship. Why is his picture in there? Well, I think we know why his picture's in there. And
Sure.
Yeah, and during the races, after that happened, whatever network the race was being shown on, the broadcasters made a conscious effort to mention Bubba as often as they could. So the race is going on, and, you know, whoever's in the top 10, let's just leave that over here. What's Bubba doing? Oh, well, Bubba Wallace is running 25th, and he's running a great race. He's only 1 lap down, and da-da-da-da-da. Let's see what Bubba's saying, you know, to his crew on the radio. Why?
Yeah.
He's not contending for a win. He's not even in the top 15. He's in the back. Why are we talking about him? Well, we know why we're talking about him. And, you know, going back to Dr. King's desire to have his kids and Black people as a whole be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. In an effort to try and do that, and to be thwarted by basically saying, well, you know, we're not doing this because he's winning races. We're doing this because he's some sort of alleged victim of hate.
Right.
No. First of all, he wasn't. Second of all, you need to have people on that graphic that have won championships or are heavy hitters in the sport. Bubba's neither. And let me say this. Personally, you know, from the way he acts and the way he's treated people, and just, you know, low-class moments here and there, I don't particularly care for him. Now, I pulled for him when he drove the 43, but at the end, I couldn't wait for him to get out of the car. And I'm like, I just don't like the way this guy acts. Now, there are plenty of other jerks on the circuit. I told you about Kyle Busch. He's one of the biggest ones. But again, he backs that up with winning races. I'm not saying that excuses him for being a jerk, but at least he backs it up with results. And we talk about Kyle Busch because he's a great race car driver. I wish we could talk about Bubba Wallace because he's a great race car driver. I think the jury's still out on that. But from what I've seen of him, he's a decent race car driver. He's probably a little bit above average. He's won 2 races. I know one was rain shortened, but a win's a win. And he won a full length race at Kansas. There are a lot of guys that don't ever win 2 races.
Yep.
And the person that they compare him to a lot, of course, Wendell Scott, who is an absolute pioneer and certainly deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. He raced when there was real racism.
Right.
He raced during a time when it was, you know, sometimes dangerous for Black men to be in certain places in the South. It just was. So he competed in a sport which, quite frankly, was on many levels racist, you know, the fans and, you know, maybe some of the drivers. I don't know. I can't really speak to that. But he faced a lot more obstacles as far as people being bigoted and racist toward him than Bubba has ever faced. And the one race Wendell Scott won, if I recall correctly, he won the race, and I don't think he was announced the winner until the next day because the people that are putting on the race didn't want to riot. They did not present him with the trophy because they thought that they stir. And from what I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's a wives' tale or urban legend or whatever. They did not want to present him with the trophy in the winner's circle because what happens, any picture you see of NASCAR Cup winners in days gone by, you see the driver with a big trophy and you see, you know,
the women,
pretty girl kissing them on the cheek. And what I read and heard was they weren't having any of that with Wendell. So they didn't give him the trophy. They didn't announce him as the winner until the next day. And I think his family didn't get the trophy until decades later.
Come on.
Because that's the way it was then. So if you want to talk about racism, that is. But people booing Bubba because he's a jerk, that's not racist. They're booing him because he's a jerk or he acts like a jerk. It has nothing to do with him being black. People don't care that he's black. Now, I will say that NASCAR, and I mentioned this before, gets a bad rap. Some of it deserved, as far as decades ago and the way it was then, the way society was then. But today, absolutely not. When I go to races, I see all kinds of different people. I see black people. I see white people. I see Hispanics. I'd see a lot of, different groups of people at these races. And again, people are so nice and friendly to one another. I mean, it's so enjoyable to go to race. The way NASCAR fans are depicted sometimes, they're depicted by people that have never been to a race, don't want to go to a race. They just assume things. They just want to stereotype people. And that's wrong no matter who does it. So, going back to Wendell Scott, he came up during a real time of racism. He had real obstacles to overcome. He was an underfunded operation. He often had to borrow parts and equipment from other drivers. And to their credit, a lot of other guys, I think, including Richard Petty, helped him out with certain things because he just didn't have the resources some of these other guys had. So even then, not everybody was racist or bigoted towards Wendell Scott, but certainly way more than anything Bubba Wallace has to experience today. So Wendell Scott certainly paved the road for him. And, why are we talking about Bubba today is because of the Newsgate thing and the race card that he decided he was going to play over, a non, imaginary incident of, racism. So I talked about Kyle Larson earlier, and he is also a beneficiary of the Drive for Diversity for NASCAR. This kid is a super talented driver. He's already won, I think, one Cup championship. He's won a bunch of races. Probably the top driver out there. So there was an incident in a race. Oh, what year was it? I think it might have been last season.
Yeah, 2022, I think.
Yeah,
maybe. Are you talking about the one with him and when they actually were pushed?
Yeah,
pushed him.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I watched the race, and as I told you before, Bubba is all full of himself at this point, right? So, and I think he fancies himself as some kind of tough guy. I don't know. If he had raced like back in the 70s and 80s, during the time when it wasn't anything for those guys to hop out of their cars and start fighting, like the Allisons in Yarborough back, I think like the 79 Daytona 500, those guys, he wouldn't dare pick a fight with them. So what happened was late in the race, I think it was, Kyle Larson and I think Bubba were racing for position, I think. And Kyle Larson didn't give Bubba a ton of room and ran him up close to the wall. Now, was it on purpose? I don't know. Does it happen? It happens. And, guys get mad about it, but that's about it. It's like, well, I'll pay you back or just whatever it is. And they just keep racing. At this particular point, and I'm watching all of this unfold, Bubba retaliates in a way that I'm thinking, this is not warranted. I know you're mad at him for kind of running you up the track a little bit, but the retaliation was just overboard. And I'm watching this real time. So what Bubba does, he basically makes a left-hand turn into Kyle Larson's car, does not lift. And what I mean by lift is he does not let up off of the throttle or gas at all. He still got it to the floor, and he's running Kyle Larson's car into the infield and wrecks him. Now, that is very dangerous. and somebody could have gotten seriously hurt, but he didn't care because, there's all this phony bravado and outrage and all this other stuff. I'm going to prove I'm a tough guy, so I'm going to retaliate against the smallest guy out there.
Yeah.
Kyle Larson is, race car drivers are little guys anyway. Kyle Larson is a real little guy. Bubba Wallace is not a huge guy, but he's a giant next to Kyle Larson. So he goes down and he gets out of the car, and I wasn't sure if Bubba was just going to yell at him or point at him angrily or whatever. Bubba gets out of the car and he's stomping towards Kyle Larson. I'm like, he's going to go fight him. So Kyle Larson didn't want anything of fighting. He's just like standing there. He's trying to get away from him. It's like, look, dude, I don't want to engage like this. So Bubba was having none of it. He's pushing him around, pushing him multiple times after Larson's basically just giving himself. It's like, yeah, I don't want to do this. So he's pushing him and bullying him around and throwing him around and whatnot. I'm like, this is just uncalled for. So, the officials, I think, are, they don't do it.
He pushed him too.
Yeah.
He pushed him too.
Yeah, he did. He pushed one of them too. And I'm thinking, you should get a multiple race suspension for that. And I know the announcers were not pleased with what he did. And some of the analysts is like, he didn't even lift. He just full speed ran into him. And in the interview after, he gave some phony baloney excuse as to why that happened. Oh, I think he said the throttle got stuck and something else happened. And the way we race, we don't lift. We just keep going. And he insulted everybody's intelligence, and he just kind of blew it off like it was no big deal. So he did get suspended for one race. It should have been more. And if he were on the street, he'd probably be charged with assault or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that certainly didn't endear him to fans because Kyle Larson is one of the most well-liked drivers in the series. And again, he picks the tiniest guy out there to show what a tough guy is.
He's 5'6", 135.
Yeah. I could blow him down.
Yeah.
I could probably get either one of my daughters to fight him and they probably win. Kyle Larson is a real little guy, and and he's not a dirty driver. I've watched him drive ever since he started in Cup. He's not a dirty driver. He doesn't retaliate typically when somebody does him wrong. Now he'll complain about it, but he's not going to go do something like that. He may retaliate in some form, but not egregiously like this. He's not a dirty driver. And Bubba knows he's not a dirty driver. I don't know if Bubba got up on the wrong side of the bed or he just wanted to prove a point or just whatever it was. But, that is an incident in a growing list of incidents that he's been involved in that does not put him in a positive light. Now,
And by the way, he won the following week too. By the way,
he did. Yeah, I recall correctly.
I'm pretty sure he did.
He got back at him the best way. Well, look, Bubba, while you watching me at home, I won this race. Hope you enjoy it. That's the best way to get back at somebody.
He's won 24 races so far.
Yeah, and I think the sky's the limit for him. He's going to win many, many more. And to me, the reason why we're talking about Bubba Wallace, a lot of it is for all the wrong reasons. We should be talking about this guy because he's a great race car driver. We're talking about him for so many of the wrong reasons. It's kind of sad in that regard. But when people try to make so many different things that aren't racist into racist type incidents, that just annoys me to no end. Because I feel like when we look at where our country is today, as opposed to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, how can you sit there with a straight face and say, we're not in a much better place as far as racial relations than we were back then. But some people don't want to let go of that. And some people hang on to it for their own gain or just whatever it is, for
the grift,
for selfish type reasons. And I feel like Bubba got caught up into all that. And I don't know if other people were in his ear and just say, hey man, you know, you can be at the forefront of our cause or just whatever it is, and put him out there. I don't know if he was just an opportunist and say, hey, this is my chance to get some mainstream attention, some sponsors, to get a better ride next year. And all of those things happened, whether it was an intentional thing or not. The end result was he got all of those things. So I also want to say that the sport is trying to include and involve more blacks, more Hispanics, more women, more minority groups that you wouldn't often think as being involved in NASCAR. I was talking to my son the other day and telling him about a young man that played football at my high school. And I went to a small high school. So anytime an athlete from my high school goes on to play professional anything, it's a big deal. So his name is Josh Bush. He went on to play in the NFL. He played for the Denver Broncos when they unfortunately beat the Carolina Panthers in the Super Bowl. And after his playing career, he went on to be a pit crew member for, I think he's a pit crew member for Trackhouse Racing now. But yeah, he's working the pits in NASCAR. So he and he's black, and there are opportunities like that as well for black athletes to be involved in NASCAR. There are several black pit crew members, because these teams are looking for athletes. They don't care if you're green. If you're athletic and you can carry a tire or carry a fuel can or a jack and do that in, split seconds, they will hire you. And it's not just that, they look for athletes in general. So during, I think the last race I watched, it was kind of neat because they introduced one of the pit crews, kind of like they would during like nationally televised football games, having the start lineups introduce themselves. And that's how these guys, it's like, my name is, Joe Smith.
Yeah.
I play tight end for Wake Forest, I'm a rear tire changer or whatever. And I thought that was neat to give these guys some recognition and attention that they deserve, because these guys are athletes. I mean, these are major college athletes that they're getting to work on the pit. So, Josh Bush, another young man that was able to get into NASCAR, and he's a minority. So NASCAR is really doing a lot of things to try to be more inclusive when it comes to that. So I just don't see how Bubba can complain at that level when he's been given opportunities that, quite frankly, I don't know if a driver of a different race with a similar skill set would have gotten. And I'm just being honest. And I'm trying not to knock him more than I've already knocked him, but I think he's got a lot of that on himself. But
I'll do the rest.
Yeah, I'll leave the rest of that to you. But I mean, if you look at, let's say, a white driver, and he's got similar numbers and a similar record as Bubba, would he have gotten the ride Bubba's gotten? I don't know that he would have. He may, somebody like that may toil in the Xfinity series or the trucks or just whatever, but he may not have gotten the same opportunity. So Bubba needs to be very thankful for the opportunity he's gotten and make the most of it. And, be classy. I mean, come on, I know boys will be boys and all that stuff, but NASCAR wants to get little kids involved and look up to these guys, especially little minority kids. I mean, they show commercials, little girls, looking up to, I guess at that point, a few years before Danica Patrick. And now there are, a couple of other ladies that race, I think, in some of the lower circuits, but looking up to them, saying, hey, if I want to be a race car driver, I can be that because this person is. And I think they want Bubba to feel that role to inspire young Black kids, boys and girls, say, hey, you can be a NASCAR driver too. Look at me. And there's another young man, his last name is Caruth. He recently won a truck race, and that was a great accomplishment. And he's a Black young man, and I really haven't watched him race, but from what I hear, he's a talented driver, and I think his ability can get him to the next level. But I think he may also be a beneficiary of NASCAR's program. I'm not sure, but regardless, in today's NASCAR, he has an opportunity to fulfill his dream and to move up and to be a success. So I said all of that to say this. As much as some people may want to make you believe, not everything is about race.
All right, so that ends episode 12, part 1 of the Bubba Wallace series. And stay tuned for part 2 of this as Greg continues on talking about Bubba Wallace and racism and how society sees him and how he sees it and how it's nothing but a woke grab for power and victimization, and you get the rest. Okay, so until then, we'll see you in the next one.